YCS Atlanta has come to a close 72 hours ago. And so I wanted to talk about the results from the event and kind of the format now that it's basically been defined. It's kind of interesting because last week I made a video talking about kind of how many different decks there were that could be played at the event, how kind of wide open the format was. And now it's, from last week to this week from the event, we've kind of gone from that wide open, undefined, new period of the format that we've kind of had, each time a new ban list come out for the last couple lists, to that basically kind of now another one deck format almost. Not really a one deck format, not quite. It's not quite to that degree, but definitely, Magicians won the event and seem to be the dominant deck now. I thought they would be the strongest deck going into the event. I thought they would win the event. And they really did, perhaps even more so than I expected, really dominate. They took 17 out of the top 32 spots in the top cut. And the next most after that was only 5 spots, which was taken by Trickstar. So yeah, I think what's really interesting now is how we kind of have 3 different versions of the deck. I mean, it's not quite that there's 3 different defined versions, but more of a spectrum from the more turbo builds to the more I would call them control builds, kind of the call build. I talked about that a little bit last week. I was actually personally playing a call build, time graph, pendulum call, duelist alliances, and hand traps. And I changed it over to the turbo build. Been playing that for the last week or so, and it definitely seems to have a higher ceiling. You make Firewall, Naruto, Vortex tournament. At least that's the any board I usually like to go to. There's different boards you can end on, but so that build's definitely, I think, the highest ceiling build. But there are certain things that it's weaker to, namely Ghost Reaper and Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere mode. So the turbo build that turbos through all 3 Electrums turn 1, and you just play as many extenders as possible. Hamster, which I've cut. I think a lot of people have cut. I heard most successful builds at the event didn't play Hamster, but those type of builds are definitely very vulnerable to Ghost Reaper, because you're playing a lot of monsters with different levels, like the mythical beasts, the different sorcerers, the Supreme Kings. Everything is different level. You're up, and especially the mythical beasts in particular. If you summon Cerberus and they Reaper you, you can get stuck with a level 8 monster in your extra monster zone for the rest of the game and not be able, or until they are willing to attack over it, and not be able to advance your own board at all or summon anything from the extra deck after that. So Ghost Reaper really hurts the turbo build. The call build is not as vulnerable to Reaper because you're mainly summoning level 4 monsters, right? So if they Reaper you, you can still potentially go Omega in rank 4 Xe. You're playing hand traps and time graphs as well, so you have non-monster disruption that you can use to potentially grind out. So Reaper is not as detrimental to that build. But then Ogre, on the other hand, is kind of like a dichotomy between Reaper and Ogre right now. Reaper is much better against the turbo build, whereas Ogre is stronger against, not as strong against the turbo build, because the turbo build can generally spit out multiple Electrums, sometimes even multiple prior to pendulum summoning, and Ogre can essentially do nothing. Whereas against the call build, I know, at least from my personal experience with the deck, if they call your Star Graph or your first Electrum, sometimes just you're when you make the first Electrum pre-pendulum summon, your entire hand isn't pendulums. You have enough pendulum combo pieces in hand to make the Electrum and then the pendulum summon, and it can make a really good play if they don't stop it. But the one hand trap can kind of it's kind of like Spiral, where there's that one vulnerable midpoint where if they ogre you, because you might have your own hand traps in hand, you might not have enough combo pieces to then continue playing through that. So it's interesting because Reaper doesn't hurt that version as much, but Ogre hurts it more. So that's one interesting thing. Kind of, I've been trying to think about the different benefits and weaknesses to the different builds. The third build then is the as a lot of you have probably heard of by now since Sunday, the FTK build, where you use you play a little bit heavier of the Supreme King engine, and you use the 13 scale that searches Instant Fusion. You add that to extra deck with Electrum, and then add it back, and then search the Instant Fusion, summon the Lunalight guy. Not the Lunalight guy. The lyrical. I don't even know how to pronounce that. I've never figured out in all of these months how to pronounce that archetype's name. There's a guy at my locals who plays it every week, but I don't know how to pronounce it. So you summon that guy, and then you burn them, and then you use the double Supreme King Starving Venom and burn them for 8,000 turn 1. So that build's very interesting, because to me, in theory, it's essentially the turbo build, but you're just playing a couple extra cards in it to be able to kill them physically that turn. In theory, it's not that much different because like if your combo is going through that far, then you're beating them anyway because you're ending on, again, for example, Naruto Vortex Firewall or Jackal Vortex Firewall, something like that. So if you're beating them, if when your combo goes through, you're essentially ending on an unbreakable board anyway, it really doesn't matter whether you're ending on an unbreakable board or physically reducing their life points to 0 that turn, because either way, you've essentially won. And if they do stop you, then you haven't won, and then those additional cards you're running, Instant Fusion and the Supreme King 13 scale, can only hurt you. But on the other hand, they're not. Both of those cards have utility in and of themselves. Like a 13 scale is still a scale. It's a pendulum card. Any pendulum card is decent in a pendulum deck. It can be a combo piece. And Instant Fusion, you can go in second, play the Thalassanizer Strict, so that's not that bad. What I was trying to get to is the main benefit to that build is actually that it essentially plays around Winged Dragon of Rust Sphere Mode, right? That's the other one of the very strong cards against the turbo build, along with Reaper. Winged Dragon of Rust Sphere Mode is extremely strong because when you end on that board of the three disruption monsters, whichever 3 you choose, if you usually end on like 1 scale remaining and like 2 cards in hand, like 2 to 3 at most 4 scales remaining somewhere in your pendulum zone or hand, some combination thereof, along with the 3 monsters and the Zephyra, Metaltron. So if they sphere mode, you essentially get OTK. If you're playing the mirror, you're probably getting OTK'd that turn. If you're playing something else, you don't have that many cards to recover. So sphere mode is extremely strong against the turbo build. Not as strong against the regular build, the call build or the control build, because they may be making Omegas or ending on only perhaps Zephyr, Metaltron, and Vortex without a 3rd monster. Some people now are actually playing around sphere mode and trying to end on 2 monsters, and they have the hand traps and the time graph that build, so sphere mode's not as good against that build, very good against the turbo build. The FTK build completely is immune to sphere mode, essentially, because if your opponent decided that instead of hand traps and they open that, but they don't have a hand trap, you kill them that turn, you reduce their life to 0. So that's essentially the biggest strength of the FTK build. It plays around raw sphere mode. All in all, it's kind of just very interesting to look at different versions of the deck there are now. Again, I don't want to call it a 1-deck format, but now that it is kind of, well, I guess it is the right word. It's not like tier 0 format, but now that it is kind of a 1-deck format, really the intricacies in those type of formats come into play. That come into play are the differences between like the different variations of that 1-deck, kind of like Spiral and Zoo. I'm actually a big fan of 1-deck formats. I think they're very skillful in general. And it's very interesting to see how they evolve, kind of like Spiral and Zoo format both did. Spiral, you started out with everyone playing Go First builds, and the trends in hand traps changed so much throughout the format, and by the end, a lot of people were essentially playing Go Second builds, to the point where even if you went first, people were like passing. That was a very interesting dynamic. And in Zoo format, that format there were so many different iterations and incarnations of Zodiac from March to September. So, it's interesting how we have these different Magician builds now, and it's going to be interesting to see what does best at the UDS this coming weekend in California. We had Atlanta this weekend. Next weekend we have the UDS in Sacramento, and YCS Bochum as well. A lot of, I know some European players from Duelbook, and a lot of people are going to that. Should be interesting to see at the events what does well this weekend. At Atlanta, the control build definitely seemed to be the most successful. Again, it's more of a spectrum. It's not quite as defined as this build and this build. It's more of a spectrum, but definitely the less turbo heavy builds, at least first and second, were both, I think, maining 1 to 2 pendulum calls each. So that was interesting. Overall, I think in Top Cut, those type of builds took up the most spots. But the turbo build, perhaps the strongest version of that will be the FTK version. And, not many people were aware of that, the existence of that. No one really knew about it until this weekend. Shout out to Colby Potts and his friend Noah, who, from the deck profile for everyone to check out, at least if they haven't seen it, were the creators of that, the guys who found that. So that's Magician. But it's also interesting to look. It's definitely also worthwhile thinking about how the other decks fared at the event. So the remaining decks in Top Cut were 5 Trickstar, 2 Invoked, 2 Draco, 1 Invoked Draco, 1 ABC, Calvin DeHaan, who is a friend of mine. We play a lot. we played a couple times and rated on Duel Book over the last couple weeks, and he said he was definitely taking that deck to the event, and he was the one ABC player I knew of who definitely was taking that to the event. He topped with it. It was definitely his build's interesting, a very trap heavy build. I've seen much more like combo heavy. There's much more combo heavy ABC builds, and then there's more trap heavy builds. He was playing very trap heavy builds, which is very interesting. I think he was maining 3 torrential. If you're playing against ABC, watch out for that. A lot of ABC players are mating torrentials now, along with some Trickstar players and Invoke players, but especially ABC players, it seems. So the biggest thing that I noticed that jumped out to me at a top cut was, well, one, through all this like thinking of all these different decks that like people were considering viable for the new format, right? Trickstar, Invoked, Draco, and there were a whole bunch, in the video. I made a whole video last week talking about all the different decks that were potentially viable right now, or last week prior to the Magician dominance. But I actually forgot to mention several that I had wanted to mention. Zephyra, Paleozoic, Magical Musketeers is a really cool deck. I know some people playing that. I've lost to a couple of those recently. The 60-card Lightsworn deck, 2 of those made top cut this weekend. So yeah, there were definitely a lot of decks, and it was interesting to see what didn't make it in top cut. No Burning Abyss topped, no Paleozoic topped, which makes sense because there was a decent amount of Draco in the format, and Paleozoic generally have a very bad matchup if Draco are in the format. They aren't necessarily. I'd say they're not viable if Draco are in the format to any significant degree. But the biggest thing I noticed was Draco. Only 2 Draco, 3 if you count the Invoked build, topped the event, and definitely, at least from what I was seeing online and hearing talked about, Draco were really big last week going into the event. Like, I thought they were going to be the second most popular deck, and in the end, only 2 topped. I heard from some people who were there that there were a good amount there, but they didn't end up, I guess, making it to top cut. So that was interesting to see. That's one deck that I guess would say significantly underperformed expectations. It's interesting to see how, in the end, you had these other decks that made top cut. 2 Lightsworn, it was actually 2 Lightsworn Dinosaur, the Invoked, the Draco, the ABC. In the end, it was Trickstar, the deck that was next most popular last format, that remained next most popular after Pendulum and, well, last format Spiral, but that's not really there anymore. Although one Spiral did top the event. So in the end, after all those different decks everyone was thinking about, Trickstar still ended up being the next most popular deck in the format, or the next most successful deck in the format, I would say, I guess, based on the from the event. And then, a couple of the other decks that topped. The Spiral deck was really interesting. I personally was rooting for Imran Khan. Once he'd made top 16, they gave him the top 32 feature match. Then they gave him another feature match in top 8. I was hoping he'd go all the way. Although I didn't. I was kind of torn because on one hand I thought that was really cool that one Spiral player made it, and like he has won a YCS with that deck, and like was really representing, and like I thought that was really cool seeing someone like taking their deck and like making it that far when no one else could in the new format with all those Pendulum. And then on the other hand, I really didn't want. I feel like we're kind of done with Spiral, and I don't really want to have to deal with that anymore. But so it was cool that he made it that far. But I guess maybe good in a way that he didn't win, because if he had won, we'd probably be seeing a lot of Spiral right now. But and then the Lightsworn Dinosaur decks were the other deck that 2 of those made it. That deck's very interesting. Some people showed me that a couple weeks ago, some friends of mine, and I saw a lot of people playing that recently. The main card is the Overtex Raptor, the new dinosaur that came out in Extreme Force, that when it's sent to the graveyard from anywhere, adds Evolution Pill to your hand, which can summon Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, which is an interesting dynamic. So you're milling so much, essentially, you're just searching free Conductor Tyrannos, or free pills which summon Conductor Tyranno. So that's interesting. Interesting deck. I was actually surprised to see that do so well, but it makes sense, I guess. So that was interesting. So yeah, it was so interesting to see like the different what the results were of top cut. I'm kind of excited that the format is more defined now. I'm a big fan of like taking one deck and, as I said before, like really finding the optimal like version of the deck, rather than like there were so many decks last week to choose from. It was like it was tough. Although ultimately I did like kind of realize Magician were the strongest deck, but Yeah, so it's going to be an interesting format. Well, very interesting to see how many players go for the FTK version of the Magician deck with the Lyra thing. Yeah, very excited. see what happens. And then in a couple, we have YCS Salt Lake City coming up next month, and then YCS Memphis, and then after that YCS New Jersey. I'm sure there's some South American or European YCSs mixed in there. And by June for New Jersey, we will have new set legal, FLOD, with the Troy Mares and everything. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward. Regarding the current format, something I'm going to probably be putting up on the channel soon is I want to see a matchup between, some people are a fan of like doing like cross-format matchups from like a really Dragon Rulers is a ever popular one to test a full-powered Dragon Ruler versus like the full-powered like current best deck. When ABCs first came out, I remember people did some. I remember watching a Dragon Ruler versus ABC video online. I want to try full-powered Bosch Pepe versus Electrum Turbo. So people probably have opinions already as to what will win that matchup, but I personally am curious to see. So I am going to be at some point soon probably uploading a matchup between Bosch Pepe and Electrum Turbo because I think the ceiling on this deck might just be higher than Bosch Pepe, and that would definitely change kind of our understanding of the how various decks that are considered to be the most powerful of all time from various time periods compare against each other. Because Bosch Pepe, I believe at least, I've always thought of Bosch Pepe as the most powerful deck of all time, and I think a lot of people do consider that. So it's going to be very, I'm interested to see what happens with that. So I'm going to be probably uploading that soon, and I'm also going to be doing some live streaming, I think, or some streaming from Duelbook getting uploaded soon, as I talked about last time. I'm still working on my setup for that, but yeah, so I will hopefully catch you guys again soon, and like the video, subscribe, etc. And yeah, talk to you guys later.